Wicked fans, this is Laura from the Sketching Pad. As a fellow Wicked fan myself, I am super excited to be demonstrating this painting for you today. If this is your first time painting with us, make sure you check out the intro video because it's going to go into some general things that you need to keep in mind before you get started in this process, as well as some things that are in your kit. But if you've already done that, grab that Wicked playlist to be playing along in the background and enjoy the process. The first thing that we're going to do is the background. So that's everything that's behind Elphaba and Glinda. So this kind of lime green color is what we're going to be mixing up first. So what we're going to do is you're going to grab your paper plate or styrofoam plate, and you're going to need green, and you're going to need yellow, and you're going to need white to mix for this color. And we're going to mix it on the plate. So we're going to take a scoop of white here. And we're going to take a scoop of green as well. And I'm using the largest brush in the kit, so depending on the size kit you have, it will depend on the size brush. So for me, it's a large round brush. I'm going to rinse my brush out just a little bit here because I had quite a bit of drippy green on it. And let's grab some of that yellow. Kind of put it there. And then I'm going to mix these colors together. So I'm going to start off with the white and green like this. And you can always kind of eyeball it to see if you want more white or more green. It just depends on how light or dark you want it. Now this is kind of a muted green, you can see. So we're going to take some yellow and mix that in there, and that's going to give you the nice lime green that we are after. And I think I'm going to add just a little bit more white to mine. I want it to be just a little bit lighter, but that's the good thing about acrylics is that you can kind of get the color close to what you want and then make subtle adjustments from there. I'm going to grab some more white and add that in there. I think that is looking a lot closer. I'm going to grab a little bit more yellow and just blend it all up. All right, so starting off with the background, it really doesn't matter which section you start with. You can start up at the top, you can start at the bottom. I generally like to start at the top just as a rule of thumb. I don't always do it that way, but if you start at the bottom, especially if you have the canvas on the table, you can accidentally put your hand in wet paint. So if you do the top part first, you're less likely to do that. I'm just going to take and fill in each of these sections. And as you go along, you'll notice that these little pieces in here, there's a lot of little holes where her hair is. You want to make sure that you cover all of that. And then there's a few sections. There's one section right up here as well that needs to be done. So just make sure that you do all of those little pieces in the background because it's going to be much harder to do that later once you have color on the hair and color on Glinda's face and things like that. So if you have a 16 by 20 canvas, which is the largest size that we offer, that's what I'm demonstrating on right now, you may want to do the edges as well. If you've got the medium or smaller sized canvases, then you don't necessarily want to do that. There's not really an edge for that because that's a canvas board. So just paint the surface and don't worry about your edges. Now you can swap to a smaller brush for some of these little pieces in here, but that is totally up to your comfort level. But you're just going to get every little piece, and don't stress if you accidentally get brush strokes into the hair. So if You look closely right here, see how I got some of the green into the hair there? No big deal. I can still see my lines, and black will cover any mistakes. So as long as you don't put it on too thick, you'll still be able to see your lines. And even if not, it's hair, so you can kind of wing it a little bit. All right, so I have my first coat all over my background. Now, because Elphaba's skin tone is the same tone as the background, we can go ahead and do that as well in the same step. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to paint her face. And you can see I'm doing slow, smooth strokes along the edges, so that way it's nice and crisp. But again, don't stress if you end up with green in where her hair should be, or her hat, because black will cover it when we go to do the hat and her hair and her clothing and all of that stuff is all going to be black. So I'm just not going to do her lips, but I'm painting directly over her nose. If you are stressed out about that and you don't want to cover her nose, which is totally understandable, you can instead use a small brush to just like go right along the edge of the nose and right along the bottom and leave a small gap. So that's something that you can do. But if you spread it out thin, you should still be able to see the nose through. And if you're struggling later with being able to see, then you can take a pencil and you can sketch the nose back in. All right, so I'm pretty happy with how that first coat has come out. Now you might be looking at it and thinking, especially on her face, that it's a little splotchy. You can kind of see the brush strokes in here, and you can see it up in the background as well, which is not a huge deal. Some people really like that kind of texture. They think it makes it look a little bit more authentic or more painterly. So if that's you, you can totally leave it the way that it is. But if it's bugging you and you think you want things to be a little bit smoother, I recommend doing 2 coats. But before we do that second coat, you want to make sure that it is nice and dry, so that way you're not just pulling more paint off of the canvas. So I use a blow dryer for this. If you don't have a blow dryer, you can just let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes and then rejoin me to do the second coat. So now that everything's dry, I'm just going to repeat what I did before. I'm just going to paint over my background and her face. Now, if you are looking at your paint, the amount of paint that you mixed in the previous step, and you're thinking, there's no way I'm going to have enough paint to cover it a second time, that's fine. Just make sure that you go ahead and remix the color before you get started, because it's always going to be easier to get the same color on everything if you go ahead and mix it at the beginning of the second coat step. So just kind of look at it, see if you need any more paint, and then just fill it back in. And I'll just remind you that the 3 colors that you need are white, green, and yellow. All right, so I'm finished with just about everything except for the nose area, and I just want to show you how to be a little bit more careful around the nose in this step, so that way you don't lose your outlines completely. So what you're going to want to do, I'm going to grab my smaller brush actually, is you're just going to want to get close to that outline there without going over it completely. And that will be plenty good enough to be able to see that outline through. And that'll keep you from having to use a pencil later. But if you need to use a pencil, don't worry about it. It's not super hard or anything like that. You just kind of resketch the same nose, and you can look at the postcard to help you with the shape. So I'm just being careful around the outlines. Like so. And that is looking awesome. So while I still have my green, what I'm going to do next is we're going to go ahead and do the lips and this cast shadow. That's also going to need 2 coats. And I'm going to go ahead and dry the skin tone first so that way we don't have any smearing or smudging. If yours is already dry, you don't need to dry. Obviously, you can just jump into the next step. I'm going to go ahead and insert this clip here real quick because I forgot to say it before I showed you the steps for how to do this. But if you want your painting to look a little bit more like the playbill, you can choose red for your lips instead of doing green for your lips. So that's kind of up to you, whatever style you prefer. If you want to go for the movie version of the poster, you can do that. If you want to go for the more classic playbill, you can choose red. Either way is totally fine, but I'm going to go ahead and show you now how we got to this point. So the cast shadow underneath here and the top of the lip and the nose is all going to be just this plain green. You don't have to mix anything in it, so that makes it pretty easy. And I'm going to use the smallest brush in my kit this time. So I'm just going to take and do a slow, smooth stroke underneath the chin and along the edge of the shadow. Just kind of following that edge and filling in gently as we go. And the top lip the same way. You're just going to trace the top edge of the lip and the bottom edge as well. And then you're going to fill in. So for the nose outline, we're actually going to use the same color. So if you're feeling confident, you can go ahead and do this, but you can also pass on it and come back to it if you want to later. So I'm just going to take my green here. And all I'm doing is I'm going to follow the outline so you can see where I've left a little gap. Sorry about the shadow, guys. You're just going to trace that nose shape. Like so. And that is going to be perfect. You can also go ahead and do a little dimple in the sides of her cheek like this to the left and right, just to give her a slightly upturned smile. For this bottom lip, you can see that it is lighter than the top lip, but it is darker than the skin tone. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that darker green here. You're going to mix it with just a little bit of your background color, just enough to lighten it a little bit. So now you can look and see that you've got dark, medium, and light green. And this is going to be your medium. And the good news is that if you do this coat and you're thinking that it is too light or whatever, you can always darken it on your second coat. That is the nice benefit of doing a second coat, is that you can make adjustments on it. All right, so I am happy with that first coat, but you can see it's very streaky. We're going to do a second coat on it as well, just like what we did for the rest of the green. Don't worry, the black is pretty opaque, so you don't really need to do a second coat on your black once we get to that. And then you just repeat with all the same things that you did before, starting with the dark green and going to the medium green. All right, so now that we have our details all done, we're going to jump into doing the black. And this is really going to cover a lot of any mistakes that you have in here. So it's really exciting and it's going to start to bring things together a little bit more. But all of the black is behind Glinda, so you want to make sure you do that part first. I again am going to start at the top of my painting and work my way down. And I'm going to use the largest brush in my kit because there's a lot of black on this painting and I don't want it to take an eternity, but you may want to use the smaller brush in certain areas like the hair. You'll probably see me switch to that. There's a little tiny triangle right here underneath Glinda's jaw here and in between her thumb, and you want to make sure you do that with a small brush as well. But everything else I would just take and do slow, smooth strokes along the edge, just like what you did and are used to doing from doing the details of the face. Slow, smooth strokes like that, and then fill it in. A lot of people like to trace all of their edges first and then fill in. I kind of go back and forth between which one I prefer. I tend to like to do a little bit of outlining and then a little bit of filling in and then a little bit of outlining and a little filling in. So just kind of going back and forth between it. But whatever seems to make the most sense to you, but you want to aim for nice crisp lines. If you're feeling like it's looking a little choppy, so like say for example, your brush strokes are starting to look a little bit like this, where they're like feathered looking, that is because you just don't have enough paint on your brush and you need to reload your brush with more paint. So don't be afraid to do that. You want to make sure that you have a nice clean edge and use a little bit of pressure to get a nice clean line. All right, so now we have all of the black in, and that's really making a huge difference. So now we're going to be jumping on to Glinda, but before we do that, we want to make sure that the black is 100% dry because we don't want the black to blend into any of the skin tone. We don't want it to smudge into her face or anything like that, and that is very common to happen with black if it's not completely dry. So go ahead and blow dry this, or if you don't have a blow dryer, let it air dry for a little bit before you move on to this next step. While it was drying, I went ahead and changed out my water because it was kind of murky, and Glinda has a lot of like lighter colors in her, and I didn't want her to turn gray by mixing some murky water into my paint. This version of Glinda is based more on the Ariana Grande version, so that's why there's a little bit more pinks and things like that in there. So I'm just gonna mix my Glinda colors on a separate plate and save the green plate for later, just in case I need those colors for anything, but it's just gonna make things a little bit clearer for you guys. So we're gonna start off with this color for her dress, and then we'll move on from there. So what you'll want for the dress is white and red, and you're going to mix those together, and that's going to make pink. So scoop out a little bit of white and a little bit of red. Now, something you should know about red is that it's very strong. So depending on what shade of pink you want her to be, I would suggest just starting off with a little bit of red and mixing it in and just seeing if you like it. And if you want it to be darker, you can always add more red, but you can't take it out once it's in there. So it's always best to start off lighter and work your way a little bit darker when it comes to those strong colors. Gonna add the rest of the red in there, and I think that's a little bit closer to what I want, but you could see I just barely put the tiniest bare amount of red on the end of my brush, and it made a really nice shade of medium pink. So I'm just going to take that color and I'm going to base coat her dress in that color. And I'm going to take my time with it. And fill it in. Okay, that was super simple, super easy. Such a tiny little section that's that color. Now we're going to need some of this color to kind of tone her skin in the pinkish family, but we're going to start off by mixing just a general skin tone for her. You're going to need to start off with white, but go ahead and locate your brown and this mustard yellow color that's called raw sienna, and the brown is called burnt sienna. And those are our base for just about any skin tone that you will need for any of our tutorials. So if you want to see a more detailed skin tone mixing tutorial, we have one. If you go to the sketchingpad.com/acrylic basics, there's a demo in there on how to mix multiple different shades of skin tone. So this one here is a very pale skin tone. So we're going to use a lot of white. So I'm just going to grab my white again and pour that onto my plate. And I'm going to do a little bit more white this time just because there's a decent amount of skin tone for her. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of the raw sienna and a little bit of the burnt sienna. So just starting off with a little dot of each. I'm going to mix those into my white to get a skin tone. And that's looking pretty good, actually. She's fairly light in the movie, so that is pretty good. However, if you want to make her slightly peachy toned instead of just like tanner, you can take a little bit of the pink that you mixed for her clothing and you can mix that into the tan color that you have, and it will make it just a little tiny bit pinker. If you want to kind of go with more pinks for her just to have more contrast with the green, that's totally up to you though. You can just simply do it a basic skin tone and you don't have to add any pink to it at all. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to start up here, and you can use whatever brush is most comfortable to you. I can go really either way. I think with the face, I'm going to mainly stick to the larger brush, but on the fingers, I'm going to jump to my smaller brush. And you just want to be careful not to cover her eye too much. It's okay if you cover her eyebrow for the same reason that it was okay to cover the nose. Because you can kind of see through it as long as you don't do it too thick. All right, so I've got most of the skin tone on there, but I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick of what I'm doing with the fingers. I don't want to cover all of the outlines completely, so I'm just going to leave a little gap around them, and I'm going to use my small round brush just to be a little bit more precise I'm going to go all the way to the edge of the background, however. I'm just going to leave a little gap where the outline touches the face and where it touches each individual finger. If you go over it a little bit, it's not a big deal because we're gonna add shading in between the fingers. This is just so that you don't lose those creases. Because fingers are a little bit harder to get back. Not that you can't, for sure. Just get a pencil and trace over it. But I'm just gonna try to make it easy. And leave a little gap where the outlines are. And then I'm going to do the same thing kind of in the hair here. All right, perfect. That looks great. So when I dry this, you can kind of look at it and evaluate whether or not you feel like you want to do 2 coats on the skin tone, or if you want to leave it as is. You could really go either way with it, honestly. With this one, it doesn't show through as much as the green, so you may just want to not do 2 coats on it. But if you do, you just use the same color and you just do a second coat over it. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick second coat just for those of you who want to. I'm just going to demonstrate for the sake of a demonstration. If you don't want to do a second coat, you can just skip over this section. All right, so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and mix up this shadow color here. Now this shadow color is pinkish in hue, so I'm going to basically create a slightly darker skin tone and add a little bit of pink to it. So just grab a little bit more white, and I don't really need a ton of this color. I'll grab just a little more just to be safe. And then I'm going to add my burnt sienna and raw sienna, and I'm going to make sure that it's a little bit darker. I want it to be darker than the skin tone here. And I like to mix it off to the side just because I like to be able to see the difference between the skin tones. So that's pretty good for a skin tone there for a shadow. And if you want it to just be a skin tone shadow, that's fine. But I'm going to add just a little tiny bit of red to it to make it a little more pink. Like so. Okay. Now this looks like it might be a little bit too dark, because really it's not that much darker than this. It's just got a little bit more skin tone in it. So I'm going to take a little bit more white, mix that in, maybe just a little bit more. Okay, that's looking more like what I had in mind. So it's just a little bit different than the color for her dress. And I'm going to use my small round brush for this because the area that I'm going for is not that large and I just don't want to get carried away. I'm just going to go right here underneath her jawline and next to her hair. And if your second coat or first coat needs to be dried, if you're nervous about it blending, You can go ahead and dry it before you do this step with me. It's kind of up to you. But just make sure you get all those little crevices and cracks in there. So that really was the most detailed part of this. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do the fingers. Let's get this a little closer. We're just going to add the shadows to the fingers at this point. So we're not going to worry about this front edge, which is going to have a little bit more white on it. What I'm going to do is add this shadow color right there. And I'm going to add it here as well. And I'm just tracing those outlines that were already there. I'm going to do the same thing right here. All right, perfect. Now what I'll do is I'm going to add the shadow color to the front edge of the thumb here. And then I'm going to add it right here as well, just to the front edge of the hand and kind of underneath the chin like this, just to separate the fingers from the face a little bit, starting that separation. And then while you have this on your brush, you can go ahead and add a few accent lines. I'm going to add one right here. And I'm going to add one right here. I'm using the reference as my guide for that. And I can add one kind of to the edge of the hair if you want to, or you can do the hair first. Ordinarily, I would do the hair first, but just because I have this on my brush, I'll go ahead and add it to the hairline here just to make it pop a little bit more. And one last place I'll do it is right here above the eyelid. You can see that kind of outline there. That's just going to kind of get that crease above her eyelid. That's going to help to define her eye a little bit better. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry this, and then we're going to add the white to the hair. We're getting really close to the end, and it's starting to really come together. So taking that white, I'm going to use my large round brush. You may want to use your small round brush if you have a smaller canvas size, but I'm just going to do a base coat of white over the hair. Now you might be thinking, why am I going to do a base coat of white over the hair when the hair is already white? That is a fantastic question. That's because the canvas is not the same sheen as the paint. The paint has got a slightly glossy finish. So if you want it to match, then you'll want to add white to the hair instead of leaving the canvas, if that makes sense. If you don't care about such things, then you do not have to worry about it. It is your painting, so you can just leave it white if you would rather. But this is also a fantastic opportunity to smooth things out. If you had any areas where like the pink or the skin tone or black went into the hair, you can correct that at this point by doing a coat of white over the curls and things. So I'm going to do my large round brush for all of this, and then I'm going to jump to my small round brush for the rest of these curls that are laying on her shoulder. I'm going to do a little white on her eye as well, on the white of her eye. All right, so now let's add some details with this white. You'll notice here that there's a circle for her earring. You can leave that as a pearl shape and just paint it in white, or in our example, it's more of a starburst. So if you want to do the starburst, then what you can do is you can kind of fill that pearl in white just to have a nice base to work from. And then you're going to take your brush, let me bring it a little closer, and you're going to do a flicking motion. So put your brush inside the pearl and you're gonna flick out like so. All the way around like that, just to get a nice, like almost a magical feel to it. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. It can just be the pearl, and that's totally fine, but I like the little starburst there. I think it adds a lot of fun detail to it. And then with your white, what you'll do is you're going to take and you're going to do a white accent line down the front of her finger to separate it the rest of the way from the face. And you'll do an accent line on the thumb, on the point of the finger, I guess I should say on the tips of the fingers. And then you'll do just a couple on her arm here and kind of her shoulder right there. So now that we have that, what we can do is we can go ahead and add some gold accent lines to her hair. Now you can blow dry it if you want to, but I'm just going to let the gold kind of blend in some. I'm just going to take and do a little gold accent line on different pieces of the hair to add some contrast. If you feel like this is too bold, you can also mix on your plate, just mix some white and the gold together, and that will tone it down just a little bit. But this just gives her hair some form, so it's not solid white. Again, this is an optional step. You can choose to skip it if you would rather. Okay, all right, I think, let me do one more right here. All right, let's go ahead and do the eyebrow at this point. The eyebrow is a light brown, so you're gonna take some brown, and you can either mix it with a little bit of your skin tone if you have that out, or you can mix it with a little white. Either way works completely fine. So I'm just gonna take a little of my skin tone because that's what I have left. No need to waste paint if we don't have to. And then you're just going to trace the eyebrow with your smallest brush, like so. It's just going to give it a nice curve, some more shape. So before I do any last details to the eye, I'm going to go ahead and dry it because the white of the eye might still be a little wet, and if I don't dry it, then the eye could possibly turn gray, and we're really not really going for gray. We're just going to go for a nice black to contrast with the rest of the painting. So using your black again, I'm just going to take my smallest brush. I'm going to start off with the pupil, like so. So then once you have the pupil in there, you're just going to take and you're going to do a line across the top of the eye there, and then a line across the bottom, like so. And you want it to extend a little bit beyond the pupil so that way it starts to create the shape of eyelashes. I'm going to do one little accent line, or like one little eyelash down here, just to add a little more detail. And then I'm going to add one or two up on the top, like so. So just a little bit. We don't want too much. So don't like try to give her crazy eyelashes. Don't add too many, or it's going to be a little bit too much. But that is basically all there is to the black. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to dry it again because I want to add one little shiny bit to the pupil just to make her eyes look a little bit shinier. So opening up my white, I'm just going to dip my small brush in there, and I'm going to add one tiny little dot to the black of the eye, and that is all there is to it. Last thing that I noticed that needs to be done is I'm going to add a couple of accent lines to the brim of Elphaba's hat, and I'm just going to use plain green for that. I don't need to mix anything. If you want it lighter, you can mix some white into it. That's fine. but I'm just going to do some green accent lines to the brim of the hat. That's going to kind of pull it in with the rest of the accent lines that we have going on with Glinda. It's just going to give her a little more shape. If you want to, you can add some more throughout her hat, throughout like her shoulder area here. Just a few extras, but all that's really needed is just a few like on that brim of the hat, just like it would be catching a highlight or something. So if you have made it to this point, you are finished with the painting. The last thing that I would suggest you do is to take a step back from it and look at it from a distance, because oftentimes when you're standing like inches from your painting, when you're painting it, you might be seeing brush strokes and things that you're just not going to see from a distance. So stand back, look at it from a distance, and kind of see if there's anything you want to adjust. Maybe even take a break for a few minutes and come back to it with some fresh eyes. But if you had any questions for us, please feel free to reach out to us. You can either contact us on social media, you can contact us email or text or phone call. We would love to help you in any way that we can. I hope you really enjoyed painting your masterpiece. See you next time.